Welcome back. Would you like me to return to being John? Welcome to AutoGPT. Enter the name of your AI and its role below. Entering nothing will load defaults. Mike here. I am at your service. I'm going to start by conducting research on Dungeons & Dragons RPG and Savage Worlds to create articles about each system and compare them. I'm going to browse the official Dungeons & Dragons website to get an accurate understanding of the game. Next, I'm going to look up information on Savage Worlds to start a new article and compare it to Dungeons & Dragons RPG. Now I'm going to start reading up on Savage Worlds to create a list of pros and cons for the system and compare them with Dungeons & Dragons RPG. I'm going to search for a third-party comparison of Savage Worlds and Dungeons & Dragons RPG to get a fresh perspective on the systems and hopefully identify more points of comparison. I'm going to browse the Eternity TTRPG website to read the review on Savage Worlds versus D&D 5e, so I can get an informed and nuanced comparison of the two systems. I'm going to conduct a Google search on Savage Worlds versus Dungeons & Dragons to find reliable sources and direct comparisons of the two systems. I'm going to go through the Google search results and look for reliable reviews that compare Savage Worlds versus D&D and save them to a file. I'm going to create two GPT agents, one for Savage Worlds and one for Dungeons & Dragons RPG, to gather detailed and reliable information for my article.
Savage Worlds GPT agent here, reporting for duty.
Hello, Savage Worlds GPT agent. Your task is as follows. Gather relevant information on Savage Worlds RPG.
Dungeons & Dragons are both role-playing games, but they differ in several key ways. Here are some of the major differences. 1. Game mechanics. Savage Worlds uses a universal mechanic for resolving actions. Players roll a fixed number of dice depending on their attributes and skills, and try to meet or exceed a target number. In contrast, Dungeons & Dragons uses a D20 system, where the player rolls a 20-sided die and then adds modifiers to the result. Both systems have their pros and cons, but Savage Worlds is often seen as faster and easier to use than D&D 2. Character creation. In Savage Worlds, characters are relatively straightforward to create, with players choosing their attributes, skills, and edges, special abilities. In D&D, character creation can be much more complex, with players choosing a class, race, and subclass, as well as customizing their character's abilities and spells. 3. Combat. Combat in Savage Worlds is designed to be fast and furious, with players often able to take multiple actions in a single turn. D&D combat can be more tactical, with players taking turns to move and attack, and using a variety of spells and abilities to gain an advantage. 4. Magic. In Savage Worlds, magic is typically easier to use and more reliable than in D&D. Anyone can learn magic with the right edge, and spells are not limited by daily uses or spell slots. In D&D, spellcasting can be more complex, with spell slots and spellcasting classes limiting the number and types of spells a player can cast. 5. Setting. Finally, Savage Worlds is designed to be a generic system that can be used for any genre, from westerns to sci-fi to horror. Dungeons and Dragons, on the other hand, is heavily tied to its fantasy setting, with a rich history and mythology that has been developed over decades. In conclusion, Savage Worlds and Dungeons and Dragons are both popular role-playing games with their own strengths and weaknesses. Savage Worlds is often seen as simpler and easier to pick up, while D&D is more complex but also more customizable and deeply rooted in a rich fantasy setting.
GPT agent for the Dungeons and Dragons RPG so I can gather comparable information to the Savage Worlds agent for my article.
D&D GPT agent here, reporting for duty.
Hello, D&D GPT agent. Your task is as follows. Gather relevant information on Dungeons and Dragons RPG.
Dungeons and Dragons, D&D, and Savage Worlds are both tabletop role-playing games, but they have some key differences in their mechanics and gameplay. Game mechanics, D&D uses a D20 system, where most actions are resolved by rolling a 20-sided die and adding modifiers to the result. Savage Worlds, on the other hand, uses a dice pool system, where players roll multiple dice of varying sizes and add them up to match or exceed a target number. Combat mechanics are also different between the two games. In D&D, combat is fairly traditional, with players rolling initiative and taking turns to attack, move, or use spells. In Savage Worlds, combat is more fast-paced and dynamic with the use of a card-based initiative system and a more flexible action economy. Gameplay, D&D is known for its complex character creation process and high level of customization. Players can select from a wide range of races, classes, and abilities to create a unique character tailored to their playstyle. D&D campaigns also tend to be longer, more serious, story-driven affairs with an emphasis on character development and progression. Savage Worlds, on the other hand, prioritizes simpler character creation and a more straightforward, action-packed gameplay experience. The game is designed to be more cinematic and pulpier, with players taking on the roles of larger-than-life heroes and villains. Savage Worlds campaigns also tend to be shorter and more episodic in nature, with less emphasis on character progression and more on high-octane action and adventure. Other relevant factors: D&D has a larger player base and more established lore and world-building, thanks to its long history and multiple editions. It also has a larger variety of official and third-party content to draw from, including published campaign settings and adventures. Savage Worlds, on the other hand, is more focused on flexibility and customization in its core mechanics, allowing for more creative and innovative gameplay ideas. It also places a greater emphasis on player agency and narrative storytelling, with mechanics designed to encourage players to take an active role in shaping the story and world around them. Overall, while D&D and Savage Worlds share some similarities as tabletop RPGs, their unique mechanics, gameplay styles, and design philosophies make for very different gaming experiences.
Information gathered to make a list of the pros and cons of Dungeons and Dragons and Savage Worlds RPGs to prepare my article on the differences and which one might be more beginners friendly.
I'm now ready to write my article comparing Dungeons and Dragons RPG and Savage Worlds RPG. I'll start by providing general overviews of both games, then highlight their respective pros and cons. Finally, I'll provide a recommendation on which system might be more beginner-friendly for those just starting out with tabletop RPGs.